US President Donald Trump is beating China with his favourite shtick, that being election interference. 3 months before midterm elections in the United States, he used an address to the nation carried on multiple American networks to escalate his calls for tighter federal voting rules.
Over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history. The Chinese government wanted U.S. president to lose the next election, and the reason they wanted me to lose is because they knew I was wise to them.
Trump says he fears the type of interference that led to his loss to Joe Biden in 2020. That's a theory disproven by his own intelligence agencies. So why again now? Scott Lucas is a professor of American Studies at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin, someone we've used many times to interpret the words and actions of the American president. Scott, good to see you. Here we go again. I want to say at the outset, if I could, we did debate here among our editorial team the value of reacting to this story, but here we are. I wonder, do you in some way share some of those reservations, and where do you land?
Yeah, I absolutely share these reservations. I mean, this was not a speech to bring clarity, to bring new information. This was a political speech by Trump to try to put his thumb on the scales of the forthcoming election in November. And so, it's a party political speech, and some U.S. networks chose not to air it precisely for that reason. That said, I'm glad we're having this discussion because we need to get out in front of what Trump said. First of all, to expose the fact, and I'll use the polite word here, that it was incorrect. I could use stronger words. And secondly, to explore the motives, which are not just simply to pass an act regarding U.S. elections. It is actually possibly to manipulate the elections and even to overturn them. It's vital, therefore, we go through that speech and juxtapose it with what we actually know to get to the truth.
Yeah, this time Trump seems to be referencing at least one unverified FBI field report. One quotes an unnamed source in China saying that claims mail-in ballots were being manufactured at scale to be flooded into the US to influence the election. If it is that he's referencing, it's not officially verified intelligence, but the allegation was something that a Chinese spokesperson from China's foreign ministry has responded to.
The claims made by the US are pure fabrications and malicious smears that have long since been proven to be groundless statements. China upholds the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. It has no interest in the US election and has never interfered in it.
Scott, I want to ask, are China worried or offended, or are they also getting used to Trump and his use of this interference shtick?
Well, in this case, China is simply rejecting an allegation, and let's keep it. So what are the facts behind that allegation? And this is important. That document that was selectively declassified is a piece of what we call raw intelligence. In other words, someone happened to make a claim that China was harvesting mail-in ballots, but in fact, there's no indication that that was correct, that was verified. And in fact, here's the key part of the story that Trump withheld. In autumn of 2020, U.S. intelligence agencies assessed that China had considered influencing the U.S. election, but had rejected that. The reason why the Chinese rejected that, according to multiple U.S. intelligence agencies in this assessment, was that they wanted to avoid destabilizing U.S.-Chinese relations, and they also feared blowback. This could actually, look bad on them if they did this. Right. But there's more. What the analyst also said is that while Iran was trying to help Joe Biden, something we can discuss later, Russia was the major country interfering in the U.S. election, and they were doing so on behalf of Donald Trump to undermine Joe Biden. Now, if I can extend that, the reason why we know that document was legitimate is because Trump officials ordered the Director of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, to bury it, to make sure this does not circulate. And at the same time, they ordered U.S. agencies to focus on Beijing and Tehran and to not look at Moscow. That's the autumn of 2020. Immediately after the election, by the way, Donald Trump fired Christopher Krebs, who was the head of U.S. cyber operations. In other words, monitoring what other countries did. Now, here's the stinger in the tail. After Trump's speech, there's another document that was released. This is a National Intelligence Council assessment. This actually reconfirms that in 2020, Vladimir Putin used proxies to spread disinformation about Joe Biden, including the allegation he was involved in corruption in Ukraine. What's interesting about those named proxies is that they are confirmed associates of Donald Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. So, in fact, the U.S. intelligence says exactly the opposite of what Trump said last night. China was not involved in interference in 2020. Russia, which of course had been interfering in the 2016 election in which Trump was elected, was also doing the same in 2020, amplifying, if not working with the Trump camp on their disinformation.
Right. So we move on to the question, with all of that in mind, Scott, why is Trump doing this now? It might have something to do with a new poll from the Washington Post and the pollsters IPSOS. Mm-hmm. It indicated his approval rating had dropped to some 37%. You can see how Trump's approval rating has trended in his second term from an opening of 45% approval in February of 25. Now it's down to that 37% mark. Voters are reportedly unhappy with the president's handling of the economy and the war with Iran. If this is a deflection, Scott, I want to ask you if you think, does election interference as a topic work? Now, before you answer, just to underline the point of to how often Donald Trump has leaned into this topic, here's a quick recap.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. This was a fraudulent election.
That election, the 2020 presidential election, was by far the most corrupt election in the history of our country.
The elections are rigged. The rigged elections. Your elections are crooked.
Yeah, so it's been a real go-to. As much as that might get a collective eye roll from people, Scott, polling would suggest that it's something that concerns a lot of people, right? Are they seriously worried about interference as much as the president hopes, though?
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm working on a book on Trump in America, so I've lived with those quotes the past few days while I've been writing. My starting point is I don't think it may be the primary issue for Americans in November's elections. I think that's more likely to be the economy. I think for some, it's going to be the failed Trump attempt to crack down on immigration. I think the war in Iran will be there. But that's not the point here. And I think I need to explain why. What Donald Trump is setting up here is the possibility of manipulating the elections for November. And then it could be, and I must emphasize, could be as serious as declaring the elections rigged and moving to overturn them in November. We know that Donald Trump never believes he lost an election. So we know that he thinks every election has been rigged against him going back to 2016, even though he won the Electoral College. But beyond that, what Trump said he wants to do, first of all, is to get adoption of the Save America Act. Now, the Save America Act is not just the name, and it's not just voter ID. It's actually an attempt for the federal government to take power of elections away from the states and to make it much more difficult to vote. I mean, this needs a full discussion, and I'm happy to do so. But it's an attempt to restrict votes, which would affect Democrats. However, there is more. Beyond Republicans redistricting to make it easier for them to win elections, what the Trump folks are hoping to do is also possibly to restrict mail-in balloting, because that may also favor the Democrats. And they may use these claims as a pretext to do so. But here's the most serious thing that could happen. Back after 2020, what the Trump folks wanted to do in a last-ditch effort to overturn the election, before the Capitol attack, they actually considered seizing voting machines. Now, of course, if they seize voting machines, they could then flip the votes from Biden to Trump. This was discussed in a high-level White House meeting. It was the subject of a draft executive order. It was not implemented at that time. But earlier this year, Tulsi Gabbard, then the director of national intelligence, went to Georgia to ostensibly look at the voting machines to set up the argument it might be necessary to seize them. What Trump is doing is saying you cannot trust the outcome of this election, therefore setting up the pretext, if they want to use it, and I'm not sure they will, but if they want to use it, which is we've got to go in and seize those voting machines from the states, which would be questionable in terms of constitutional authority. But we know how far Trump will go to try to stay in office.
Scott, if deflection doesn't work, if what you describe as manipulation doesn't work, what then happens in November? How bad could it get? What would it change about his behaviour if Republicans get the sort of beating that his approval ratings might imply is coming?
I'm going to go back again, and partly because I've been writing about it, I'm going to go back to 2020. And I just want to remind folks that although that was a presidential election, not just congressional elections, how close it came to what in effect was a coup. And that is, had the Vice President, Mike Pence, not refused to, in effect, intervene over the congressional certification of the vote, if Pence had followed a scheme put out by Trump and his advisors where they would not recognize some of the states that Biden won, that coup probably would have succeeded, irrespective of the Capitol attack that followed later that day. That's how close it was. I'll also remind folks out there right now that in 2026, during the second term of Trump, the Trump folks have removed regulators of elections. Just a few days ago, they removed the commission or the committee that's responsible for liaising between the federal government and the states. It was created after the 2000 voting issue in Florida, but it basically liaised over administration of ballots and on the counting of ballots. They've removed that regulator. So they have cleared space to do this. Will they do this? I can't predict they will, but there is form that they have tried this in the past. And if they try, we're on unknown territory because, just to put it bluntly, no sitting president has ordered the seizure of voting machines, and no president before has considered issuing a national emergency, an order of a national emergency, in order to justify trying to do so.
Scott, the president has really set the scene for what promises to be an incredible 3 months in the lead up to the midterm elections. Thanks so much for drawing your focus to it today and ours. We thank you again. Scott Lucas from University College in Dublin. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So there is a lot to unpack on this one. Do you believe Trump? If it is a cynical strategy deployed to offset low approval ratings, will it work? Should we even be reporting on it? The floor is yours. We'll be reading your comments until we see you next time. From Berlin, it's bye for now.